Dinosaurs fought long and hard to get to the top spot. For the vast majority of the Triassic, their period of emergence, they were pinned down by the far more formidable reptiles, the Pseudosuchians. But before their collapse at the end of the Cretaceous, there would be yet another period of dinosaur subordinates, this time at the mercy of a different formidable reptilian presence. Not a Pseudosuchian, but another branch of reptiles from the Triassic that can trace their emergence to roughly the same time dinosaurs broke through. The pterosaurs. And one of the largest pterosaurs was so large it could have considered an adult human a snack. In fact, this was a reptile that commonly feasted on titanosaurs. This video is about Hatzegopteryx, one of the largest terrestrial predators ever, and far more upsetting on account of it having wings. We'll cover all of this, and we'll even end with a suggestion of what it may have sounded like. The Late Cretaceous was a period of giants. It was home to so many of the most iconic dinosaur species that Jurassic Park had to exploit some serious artistic license when stealing from it to make its movies more interesting. T-Rex, Spinosaurus, Triceratops, and the monster that maybe holds the title for the largest terrestrial animal ever, Patagotitan majorum, were all Cretaceous experiments, among many others. But it wasn't just dinosaurs that went enormous in the Cretaceous. There were other reptiles involved, too. Deinosuchus, one of the most massive crocodilians ever to skulk ominously in the mud, was a 5-ton-plus example of why the fear of crocodiles is still in our DNA. And even the turtles were a bit too much, with the largest example known, Archelon, swimming about in the Cretaceous oceans, weighing more than twice the weight of a pickup truck. And of course dodging the largest lizards to ever lizard, the mosasaurs. So, big was fashionable during this period. But the rules of ecology still did apply. While ecosystems with plenty of resources facilitated terrestrial monstrosities, animals trapped on islands would often exhibit island dwarfism. One such habitat that did just that was a little mound of land on what is now Romania called Hateg Island. During the late Cretaceous, the supercontinent Pangaea had broken up into chunks, and the landmasses that are now Eurasia and North America were grouped together into a lump called Laurasia. The southern border of this large continent was framed by the Tethys Sea, which covered much of the continental crust that makes up southern Europe today. Towards the end of the Cretaceous, the collision of the African plate into the Eurasian plate crumpled this crust, a bit like the front of a crashed car, sending lumps of land up and out of the sea. And around 200 kilometers offshore of Laurasia, one such lump of uplifted crust had formed a large forested island, above what would one day become Romania. This island was subtropical, warm and wet, and it had networks of rivers, swamps and deltas all across it. Hateg Island would have at some point been connected with the mainland, as evidenced by all the terrestrial animals found on it. But for much of its existence it was surrounded by a deep marine basin, far less likely to cyclically drain or dry out, and thus condemning its inhabitants to countless generations of isolation, locked in and surrounded by a deep moat full of mosasaurs. And as is so often the case when fauna are isolated like this, these inhabitants became very unique and very small. So far, 9 species of dinosaur found in the sediment from Hateg Island are thought to have been indigenous. There were endemic mammals here too, developing unique insectivorous habits, and birds found nowhere else on Earth, such as the petite and flightless Balarbondok, who had, like many island birds would do after the dinosaur extinction, sacrificed flight for a terrestrial life on the island. There were endemic lizards, crocodiliforms, frogs and snakes on this island too, but the strangest animals to inhabit this very special little sanctuary, at least for this period, were the dinosaurs. For example, there was Struthiosaurus transylvanicus, a pretty standard-looking ankylosaur, but with a shorter neck and a diminutive stature of about hip height to a human. Given that Ankylosaurus would have weighed anything up to 8 tons, this 400-kilogram Happy Meal variant was really quite petite. And it wasn't alone. Despite the misleading name, Hateg inhabitant Zalmoxes robustus was one of the smallest iguanodontids ever found, dwarfed by its 3.5-ton cousin Edmontosaurus, running about at 45 kilograms, and perhaps just knee height to a human. But there were sauropods on this island too, and not just any sauropods, titanosaurs. These lumbering colossi were the largest dinosaurs on the island, just as they were the largest dinosaurs everywhere else. Only on an island of dwarfs, this accolade had a much lower bar. As such, Magyarosaurus, a very close relative of the 15-meter Repetosaurus, was only about 3 meters long and a tenth of the mass. It's worth noting that Repetisaurus itself was already one of the smaller of the titanosaurs, having been shrunk by the very same island dwarfism factors that Magyarosaurus faced, this time on Madagascar. So, when compared with the true titans like the 31-meter, 57-ton Patagotitan, Magyarosaurus, with its humble 1-ton bulk and about the length of a horse, was truly tiny in comparison. So this island was a quirky menagerie of tiny variant on the mainland monsters. But why? Let's take a quick look at the concept of island dwarfism to set us up for the big revelation. Island dwarfism is a well-established product of ecology in which animals trapped on an island get smaller over time. We've seen it happen with the last remaining mammoth stuck on Wrangel Island. We've seen it in tiny hippos in Cyprus. We've even seen it in hominids such as the tiny Indonesian Homo floresiensis. It could even be argued that the aboriginal human pygmy population on the same Flores Island today have independently evolved to be rather small for the same reasons. There are several proposed mechanisms for island or insular dwarfism. The most intuitive one relates to resource abundance. Large herbivores require a lot of food. Take cows, for example, with a good system at peak efficiency and an average production of 3 tons per acre. Farmers will require almost 3 acres of land to produce enough hay to continuously support just one single cow. These are large animals and they eat a lot, and when suddenly they're found on an island with limited hay and very few attentive farmers to prevent overgrazing, they're at serious risk of starvation. Now, if they can survive for enough generations, the ecosystem they find themselves in will naturally favor smaller offspring. Smaller offspring need less food, and therefore are not going to struggle as much to meet their requirements. They'll be happier, healthier, and more reproductive. And so the genes that mutated a bit to make them smaller will be passed on, while those of the larger ancestors will eventually disappear. And over time, you're left with mini versions of the ancestral phenotype, insular dwarfism at work. This mechanism is the simplest to understand, but there are others that no doubt play a role too. With the endless predator-prey arms race, herbivores grow big also as a defense mechanism. But if they are isolated on an island with no predators, a large bulk becomes an expensive luxury and will be lost in favor of a more efficient body. Social behaviors can also factor into it. Large animals need larger territories, and this too becomes a disadvantage when real estate is rare and highly sought after. So we've covered insular dwarfism, but this is just one direction in which ecology can carry its passengers when locked on an island. Another route is quite the opposite: island gigantism. Sometimes, especially when mammalian predators seem to be involved, being small is a better way to escape being eaten, and so when locked on an island with no predators, this restriction in size can be lifted, and prey animals become larger instead. Around 9 million years ago, even hedgehogs got scary with the 60-centimeter long Dinosaur, filling niches of modern cats and dogs on an Italian island. In Madagascar again, ratites got swole in the form of the elephant birds, and around Sardinia the waters of the Miocene were patrolled by wolf-sized otters. So sometimes island fauna responds by getting smaller, and other times it responds by getting enormous, but it's not just prey animals that do this. In some cases, it's predators that take advantage of a lack of competition to become truly monstrous. And on Hateg Island, unfortunately for the tiny little dinosaur inhabitants, that's exactly what the resident pterosaur did. In a world of miniatures, Hatzegopteryx stood almost as tall as a giraffe. While the mainland was a rampaging wilderness of normal-sized terrestrial theropod predators and truly titanosaurs, Hateg Island was a safe haven for an animal that would otherwise have been pushed to the fringes of the ecosystem to scavenge and pluck morsels among whatever was left to scrounge. And so, with no real threats to keep it down, Hatzegopteryx truly dominated. This was a pterosaur that was likely to have occupied niches similar to that of modern storks on the mainland. And if this doesn't sound very intimidating, it might be because storks are traditionally misrepresented in popular media, so let's address that first. The outstanding classic Disney movie Dumbo did a lot of the groundwork for making us think of storks as benevolent, helpful birds who gently bring babies to loving families too puritanical to explain sex to their children. But in reality, give a stork access to a human baby and it would more than likely peck its eyes out and eat it. Storks are terrifying. Today they're up there at the top of the list for the largest flying birds, with the marabou stork occupying joint top spot with the Andean condor in terms of wingspan. These birds could touch both sides of a door frame 3.2 meters apart, and they spend a lot of time walking around like old, badly burned wizards with dangly scrota around their necks. When they come into land, they can block out the sun, and while they're typically shy, scavenging creatures, they are no doubt biding their time until one of us gets complacent enough to leave a newborn out on the lawn for them. If marabous aren't convincing enough, just look to their bunkmates over in the swamps, the shoebills. These animals make no secret of the fact that they're still furious about their new position as wading birds, and they can't wait to get back up the chain of command to the original theropod apex predator position. Storks are cold-blooded killers, and we should count ourselves lucky that we're bigger than they are, but 70 million years ago we most definitely were not. Hatzegopteryx was not a stork, nor was it a bird, or even a dinosaur at all. It was a pterosaur, and when compared with the largest flying birds alive today, it was perhaps 4 times as big. This was a member of the clade of monstrous pterosaurs called the azhdarchidae, the majority of which come from the Late Cretaceous and became the largest flying creatures ever. If you've heard of the South American Quetzalcoatlus, this was another example from the same family. This group of pterosaurs were thought to occupy stalky niches before stalks had been invented to fill them, and so would have soared high on updrafts to new locations where they'd use their spear-like beaks to peck at carrion, steal hatchlings from nests, and stab at anything they could get to before their heavier dinosaur competitors chased them away. So, like storks, the azhdarchidae pterosaurs had a grudge, and Hatzegopteryx carried this with it when it landed on Hateg Island. On Hateg Island, Hatzegopteryx found itself surrounded by tiny little prey items that it didn't have to fight for. Here, it didn't have to sneak around. It was the largest killer. And it soon evolved adaptations in its beak that helped it shift from a relegated scavenger to an apex predator. These adaptations included an enormous gape, and far more complex and powerful musculature, suggesting that unlike its mainland relatives, it wasn't settling merely for the small animals that it could swallow whole, but it could have also tackled larger prey. By folding in its wings, it could walk among the trees of the forest, standing in wait, perhaps even camouflaged against the greenery, before coming down with a piercing and massive attack from a 2.5-meter-long beak, capable of sending full-sized mini-dinos into its gut. From its generalist origins, it likely would have been able to eat more or less anything it found on the island, and when it got bored in one location, it could use the ocean winds to rise up into the air and descend like a demon into new hunting grounds somewhere else on the island. In an interesting contrast to the monster Quetzalcoatlus's relatively weak neck, evolved for pecking at small critters, Hatzegopteryx had a reinforced neck that could handle tremendous lateral forces perhaps imparted by large, struggling prey. But this predator didn't have teeth, so for it to tackle the larger animals of the island, like the 3-meter titanosaurs, it likely would have needed to stab its victims. Storks again give us an idea of what this would have looked like, as well as a hint as to what the mating rituals among these inconceivably large flying reptiles might have involved. But one piece of the puzzle that's almost always missing from the fragmented and very dead fossil remains of our prehistoric counterparts is what they sounded like. And perhaps we can look to storks for an idea of this as well. Just quickly before we do, it's time to thank you for giving us your time, and remind you that you can join the subscribers list to see more videos like this. If you click on the notification button, you'll get an email when the next one is up, and as always, please give us your like if you've enjoyed this one so that others can find it as well. So what kind of horrific sounds might have come out of Hatzegopteryx? To give us a clue, we should return to that furious, grudge-bearing swamp monster, the shoebill stork. Not only do these guys have murder in their eyes, with a very limited vocal repertoire, they've settled for mimicking the sound of a machine gun. This deeply unsettling sound begins with a knowing shake of the head before 2 parts of the beak are rapidly clapped together. And if that isn't intimidating enough, this rapid-fire clapping is often accompanied by the strained vocal groan of an infected Donald Sutherland. And they do all this just to say hello. So imagine all of that, but with the Triassic rage of a pterosaur lion expressing for the first time its full potential as an apex predator, no longer relegated to the swamps or the rubbish piles, but finally dominating the land, and as tall as a giraffe and with all the malicious intent of a body snatcher. And that's all for this video. Thanks again for watching it, and let us know what you think in the comments. See you for the next one.